He woke up, climbed out of bed, and stretched his tiredness away, feeling the twinge where the small bruise had formed. The strike had been hard, but it was not enough to unhorse him, Sir Barristan falling to his lace for the first time ever. It gave him the chance to win, to crown her, and see that smile he enjoyed seeing so much. The one she kept for him, and him alone. Walking away from the bed, he called for the servant to ready the bath, and when it was prepared, he lowered himself into it and felt the warmth of the water as it soothed his small aches and pains. Jay bathed, but he used it more for that relief it brought him than out of any need to wash. Dressing quickly, he walked from the room, Sir Jaime smiling at him upon seeing that his hair was down and not tied up as it usually was. His sworn shield knew him far too well, and he knew that Marjorie preferred him to wear his hair this way. Jay, knowing by the smirk on Jaime's face that he was in for a torrid time when they sparred after he broke his fast. Jay, knowing by the smirk and fast, named or not, the White Lion would not care, and Jay would be at the receiving end of both his blade and his tongue before they headed to the tourney grounds. Still, there was no one he'd rather have as his Kingsguard than Sir Jaime, no man he trusted more than the famed Lannister knight. Reaching the room, he saw the Bold and Prince Lewin were on guard this morn, Sir Arthur obviously getting his final practices in, and Jay shuddered at that. He knew that he'd more than likely have to face the Sword of the Morning before the day was done. The Bold gave him a warm smile, while Prince Lewin looked at his hair and smirked. Jay turned around to see if Sir Jaime wore a smile that would prove he'd told the Dornishman of the reasons why he wore it so, though he found Sir Jaime to be far too good of a mummer to be certain if he had or had not. "My prince," Prince Lewin said with a nod. "Sir Arthur?" he asked, seeing Lewin now smile even more, practicing to put a prince on his arse. "My prince," Lewin said with a chuckle, and Jay sighed as he walked into the room. Elia sat speaking to his grandmother and aunt while Ray, Egg, and Viserys were speaking together. Only his father noticed his arrival, and as always greeted him with a warm smile, though soon enough Ray saw him too, his sister beckoning him over to sit in the seat she'd saved beside her. Jay greeted Elia and his grandmother with a kiss to their cheeks and laughed as Dany put her face forward, expecting a kiss too. "I'd not have my brother jealous, Aunt," he said, looking to see Egg roll his eyes, his brother knowing that just like him, Jay had also given his heart to the woman he loved. Egg needs to be jealous once or twice a day at least, as far as I'm concerned, Dany said, Egg looking to her and nodding that he agreed. They had an odd relationship, teasing each other, almost provoking each other into showing their true feelings. Jay could only put it down to how long it had taken them to realize that they were in love and not just accepting of their betrothal. He leaned forward and kissed her on the cheek, hearing his brother gasp loudly, the mocking tone of it not lost on Dany or on Ray as he sat down beside his sister and kissed hers too. "Not even close to good enough, Aegon Targaryen," Dany said as if she was put out, and this time it was Ray who rolled her eyes. "Ready for your gift, Jay?" his sister said, and Jay looked around at the table, seeing his father and Elia look his way. "I had thought, tonight, at the feast," he said, confused. "There will be more then, son, but this one your sister made for you herself," his father said, and he saw Ray look nervously at him. "Ray, you didn't need to."
"Well,"
he began, and then saw that she looked upset. "But I thank you, truly," he added quickly, seeing her smile as she handed him the package. "It's your 6th and 10th name day, Jay, your majority," she said as he opened it up. The coat had a white dragon and a white wolf on each collar, both standing out against the black material and looking striking to his eye. The sheet incorporated his personal sigil into the design, only made it that much more special to him, and when he stood up and removed the one he was wearing to put it on, Jay saw Ray smile beamingly at him. Even more so when he hugged her and told her how much he loved both it and her. The rest you'll get tonight, young man, and don't expect them all to be as thoughtful as your sisters, his grandmother said, and Jay nodded, seeing the sparkle in her eyes as she spoke. I heard Sir Arthur went out early this morn. He must fear you, nephew, Viserys said, his uncle both jesting and not. I doubt there is a thing in this world that Sir Arthur fears, uncle. More likely he's getting himself loosened up before he knocks my dear brother on his arse, Egg said, his brother definitely jesting and needling him a little, just like Jay did to you yesterday, Egg. Ray said to last from Elia and his father. He got lucky. Tell them you got lucky, Jay, Egg said, and Jay looked at him before putting on his most serious expression. Of course I got lucky. How else could I have beaten my dearest brother unless... Unless, Danny said, joining in with their fun. Unless, as usual, my brother was distracted by his betrothed and just happened to glance to her rather than to my lance, he said. And Egg looked abashed as the laughs rang about. Don't worry too much about it, son. We all do it. No doubt Jaehaerys may find his own distractions later on, his father said, and this time the laughs were at his expense rather than his brother's. Jay having gone a shade of red as he knew his father spoke the truth. It had happened yesterday when he rode against the bold, Jay thinking of only having 2 more matches to win after this one and then glancing up to see her looking down at him. Marjorie smiling broadly, and Jay almost losing the match because of it. He's thinking of her again, Ray said with a giggle. I wonder what gift Lady Marjorie has gotten for our dear brother, Egg said, and Jay listened, as for the next few moments his relationship with Marjorie became the talk of the table. Through it all, he looked to his father and found him staring back at him and seeming to be lost at times. Jay knew exactly why that was. Try as they might to think fondly on his mother, something they managed far more often than not, there were certain days when an air of sadness would come over his father and him when they did so. For Jay was always on the day of her death, and her own name day. For his father it was the former, and though Jay knew he fought to make it not so, it was always on Jay's name day too. So he finished his meal quickly and stood up ready to go and spar with Sir Jaime. Removing his presence, when his father got that look in his eye, always brought him back to himself far easier than if he stayed around he'd found. It was something he'd learned while fostering in Highgarden. The ability to see what it was that people wished for or needed had come to him while spending time with Marjorie and her grandmother. Wait up, both Viserys and I want to test our blades against you today, brother, Egg said as he quickly ate what was left on his plate. Now that is a present. Getting to beat you both before I need to ride in the tourney. Shh, he japed. Not today, nephew. Today will give you no such gifts, Viserys said with a determined look on his face. Then I shall have to try that much harder, uncle. He walked from the room and out to the sparring yard with Sir Jaime, unsurprised to see that Loras wasn't there. His closest friend was no doubt just like Sir Arthur, getting in some last-minute practice for the joust. Moving to the spot where they usually sparred, he removed Darksister and took up his stance, Sir Jaime smiling as he did likewise. The 2 swords crashed together, Jaime forcing him back while Jay tried to lay a trap for his mentor, almost smiling when he saw him step into it, only for Jaime to quickly back away. Trying something different. He moved forward and then jumped into the air, bringing the sword down hard as he spun. The strike was parried easily, though, and soon Jaime began to take control. It took some time, but Jay yielded just as Egg and Viserys arrived. Your first loss today, brother, though not your last, Egg said with a chuckle. Against Jaime, he always brought live steel to bear, the 2 of them having sparred so often that there was never any danger of a stray blow. It was not something he would do facing Viserys and Egg, so, to the now gathered crowd's disappointment, there would be no battle between Dark Sister and Blackfire today. Instead, it was to be tourney swords, Jay picking his out and facing off against Viserys, while Egg warmed up against Sir Jaime. By the time he'd beaten his uncle and was facing his brother, Dany and Ray had arrived, and Jay looked up to see both of them speaking to Marjorie, who he'd not noticed had been there for some time. He didn't need to look at his brother's face to see he was smirking at the looks he was giving her. Egg, for once, though, seemed more concentrated on their match rather than his betrothed. Dany looking slightly put out that Egg wasn't looking her way. As he brought his tourney sword against his brother's, the strangest thing happened, and Jay soon found himself fighting defensively rather than offensively, as he usually did against Egg. His eyes were more on what he thought he saw behind Egg, instead of the sword in his brother's hand. Duh. His distraction would turn out to be a painful one, as he was caught across the head by a blow which took him to his knees, Egg throwing his sword to the ground to check on how badly he'd hurt him. "Jay, are you hurt, Jay?" He heard his brother's panicked voice. "I'm well. You were right, it was only my first loss," he said, trying to make a jape as he rose to his feet. He wasn't looking at his brother, though, but behind him, Jay trying to see where the dark-haired woman and the large white wolf had gone to. King's Landing, 298 AC, Ned Stark. He looked down at his nephew as he lay in the bed, Jaehaerys looking to all the world as if he was simply sleeping. Ned, too, would have thought so too, if not for the fact that it had been over a week since he'd last been awake. That his children were so worried about their brother was no surprise, and he agreed with the Queen that they shouldn't see him this way. They were already emotionally fraught as it was, and better the thoughts of their brother ill than the actual image of it. Besides, Jaehaerys' condition was not the only thing on his or his children's mind, all of them still reeling from what Jay had told them the last time they had spoken, reeling even more now that she'd actually arrived in King's Landing. Ned had listened, while his nephew had talked about what needed to be done with Cat, his teeth grinding and jaw working as his anger grew. She had brought this on to herself, her actions leaving Jaehaerys with no other choice, and that she was keeping her head was far more than could be expected. Jon Arryn had lost his own for conspiring to bring the Targaryens down. Cat, by all rights, should have faced the same sentence. It was only the love a brother had for his siblings that had stopped that from happening, and Ned cursed the woman for putting his nephew in such a position. A king needed to be fair and just, and there would be those who looked at Cat and the sentence and thought it was neither, making Jaehaerys look weaker than he should. For now, though that was a different problem for a different day. And so he reached out and took his nephew's hand in his own and began to speak softly. On the other side of the bed, Marjorie sat holding her husband's other hand, and Ned could only hope that what Howland had said was true and that his words would be heard. "Brandon was wild, Jon," he said, noticing the Queen look his way and nodding that he knew what he was doing, even if he wasn't sure he did. He needed his nephew to remember to be a wolf as much as he was a dragon, and while he felt that was true, he noticed the dragon side come more to the fore also. The dropping of his name, the wearing of the clothing. That was down to him being a king and needing to look the part, embracing his family's heritage, making choices that benefited House Targaryen as much, if not more, than the realm itself. That was his nephew being a dragon. Howland had said he needed to remind him who he was, to speak to him about his mother. Well, his mother was a wolf, and he had been Jon long before he knew who Jaehaerys was. He was wild and free. The wild wolf indeed, just as I was the quiet one, Benjen. I've heard some referred to as the forgotten wolf, and though it pains me to speak it true, it seems I must. Your mother, though, gods, Jon. Your mother. The she-wolf, the winter rose, the wolf-maid, wolf-girl. She had many names, but to me, she was simply Lya. He looked over. and saw that Marjorie was showing perhaps the first hints of a smile that he'd seen her wear in days. When we were young, it was always Laia who chose our adventures. The game she could think up? I swear, John, no one, not until Arya came along, no one even came close to being able to make such a simple thing as a broken twig into something that could give us hours of amusement. Ned laughed softly as he remembered back to those days, to running through the Godswood and being chased by his sister brandishing a twig as if it were a sword. All of us, even Brandon, would drop everything the moment she'd suggest or ask us to. My mother, your grandmother Lyara, she would watch us from the bailey where I'd watch you all, father by her side. Gods, John, to see my father laugh so, no one else but she could make him do so. He moved his hand to his eyes and closed them, using his fingers to try and stop the water which threatened to leak from them, and finding he could not. So he wiped the tears away and looked to see the queen was looking at her husband, and not him. And he felt relieved for that. When your grandfather decided to send me to the Vale to foster, when I agreed to go, Leah didn't speak to me for a moon. Do you know how hard that is, to not speak to someone for that long, John? The sheer amount of willpower it must have taken her. I tried to do everything in mine own power to get her to talk to me. I can't. I joined in with her games, or tried to, only for her to walk away with Benjen and leave me alone. I swear it to you, John, here and now, and may the old God strike me down if I'm speaking a lie. I swear to you I'd cry myself to sleep at night after going another day without hearing her voice. Marjorie looked his way. Though he didn't see it, his eyes were focused on his nephew's face, where he saw her there for the briefest moment of time. The water in his eyes, thoughts of the past, he couldn't tell which, but for some reason he saw her lying there instead of his nephew. That the sheets weren't blood-stained was the only thing which didn't have him running from the room. Ned shook his head, and looking back to see what he was, now certain, with a different expression on Jaehaerys's face. The night before I was due to leave, she came to my room and spoke to me finally. She cursed me for leaving her and begged me to stay. She wished me well and told me that I'd have a great time and would make new friends when I later spoke on my own fears. Your mother laughed with me, cried with me. We lay on my bed and spoke of when we'd see each other again. Gods, John, if I could go back to that day, if I could but see that girl once more, He stood up and walked to the nearby table and filled himself a glass of water, the words starting to stir up things that he'd not thought about in many a year. After composing himself, he moved back to the bed and nodded to Marjorie before he took his seat and began speaking again. Looking back now, I can see that things were never the same between us from that day on. I loved her. She was my sister, but something changed when I went away. Something broke between us that I never even knew was there, and it never got fixed. When I saw her again or read her letters, it was like glimpsing at shadows, John. It was memories of my sister that felt almost like someone else's. I was sure she'd changed, but I know now that it was me who had. It was a realization that hit him suddenly, and he wondered why he'd never had it before. He'd gone away, and he had changed, and when he met her again, he'd been certain it was her. She was still the she-wolf, but he wasn't exactly the quiet one. Oh, he was still quiet, all right, but maybe he just hadn't been a wolf. When we met up in Harrenhal, I could see how people saw her. Mine own eyes may have been elsewhere, but I wasn't blind, and she was happy, John, far happier than I'd ever known her to be. Fool that I was, I thought it was because of Robert, and because we were all together once more. I know now it was because she'd found her love, just as you found your own. He said, looking to Marjorie, who was wiping her own eyes as she looked down on her husband. Ned stopped for a moment, drinking down his water as he looked off to the side and allowed Marjorie to wipe her eyes, just as she had done for him. I should have known it was her, the night of the laughing tree. I should have known. to see her ride, how she was while on a horse. You get that from her, John. Don't let any tell you different. I've seen you on Winter, and that you got from your mother. She was unmatched. None of us even came close. I doubt there was a man or woman in the North, and I've not heard of any in the South who could keep up with her. Gods, John, to have seen you both, to have watched you both ride together, what I'd give to see that, to see you race, to see you lose. He said, laughing and hearing the small laugh that Marjorie made. He saw a small twitch of his nephew's lips, and he looked to Marjorie thinking it something good, only to see her sadly shake her head and let him know this wasn't something that she'd not seen. He's thirsty. She said softly, and he watched her walk to a small jug on the other table. Ned looked on as she dipped a cloth into the mug she'd just filled, the water dripping from the cloth as she put it to his nephew's lips. Marjorie pushed it slightly inside Jaehaerys' mouth, and then after a moment dipped it back into the mug, and did so once again. "Keep talking, please," she said, looking to him. "I never saw the arguments with your grandfather, John, but Nan said she made it clear, and I can picture them and almost see her face. But what happened, and there's no need to speak on that. So I'll speak on when we last spoke before. Before. He gulped and grabbed his mug only to find it empty. He rose to his feet and moved over to the table and filled it, draining it just as quickly before he filled it once more, and then made his way back to the seat. She stood in front of me, John. I was of the size and build I am now, bar a little around the middle. He chuckled. She stood in front of me and to my face told me that I was not a wolf and no brother of hers, that I'd lost my way and cared more for a drunken whoremonger than I did my own sister. I was young, John, never brash, but always proud, and by the gods, it shamed me to be spoken of in such a way. But when I look back on it, when I think back upon it, it's not the shame I feel, although that's still there. Nor is it the regrets that I didn't listen, although they're there too. It's the memory of your mother, John, of Lya, her fierceness. Gods, there was no one even close. She was but a slip of a thing, and yet I'd not dare take her on. She fought, John, be it with words or deeds. She fought, that's who she was, more than any, a fighter. Right to the end, she was a fighter. She fought to bring you into this world, weak and tired though she was. She fought to see you born, and to give you the chance to be the man you needed to be. She fought harder for you than I ever did, and I swear it, John, she fights for you still. He stood up and moved closer to the bed. Bending down, he brought his face close to Jaehaerys' own and kissed his cheek, Marjorie moving closer to them both as well. You are the son of a she-wolf, John, the son of a fighter, and it's time for you to fight. We need you here. I, Sansa, Arya, Robb, Elle, and the babe, we need you here. John, your wife needs you more than any. You are your mother's son. Fight, John, please, fight. King's Landing. Afternoon. Prince Jaehaerys Targaryen. After being checked out by the Grand Maester at Ilya's insistence, and to his own embarrassment, Jay headed to the tourney grounds with Sir Jaime. He made his way to his horse to ready the stallion for the upcoming joust. Caraxes was half sand, steed and half courser. His chestnut coloring always looked red in the sun and had led Jay to name it after the bloodworm that was ridden by Prince Daemon. The horse had been gifted to him by Marjorie's brother on his 12th name day, and to Jay's mind, there was none that could match him. He rubbed the horse down, fed him, before dressing him in the barding himself, just as he always did, much to his squire's annoyance. Martin would help with the lance work today, but he knew that Jaime's cousin wished to do this part too. It had become a routine for Jay, though, and he took comfort in it, finding it kept him and Caraxes close, and it relaxed them both before the jousting began. Once he was done, he made his way to his tent to put on his armor, finally seeing Loras for the first time that day. "Jay," Loras called out. "There you are. I thought you'd still be off practicing," he said with a small laugh. I'm facing Sir Arthur first, and you should have been practicing with me, Loras said, slightly annoyed. You know my routine, Loras. I like to keep Caraxes fresh. Besides, it's my name day, he said, getting a smile from his friend. I know. I wonder what my sweet sister has gotten you for your gift. Perhaps nothing, he said, though he knew that wouldn't be the case. He and Marjorie had been exchanging gifts for years after all. Well, I came to wish you good fortune. Lord Royce will take some beating, Loras said, reaching out and placing a hand on his shoulder. You too. I hope we meet in the final, he said, seeing Loras smile. You'll be so much easier to beat than Sir Arthur. He chafed before quickly ducking when Loras pretended to hit him. He turned to Sir Jaime when Loras walked away and was sure he saw them again. So he moved past the knight and walked quickly to the back of the tent, only to find no sign of them. Seeing the concerned look on Jaime's face, he told him what he thought he'd seen. The knight, though, shook his head when he described the white wolf. Leaving it for now, they entered the tent to find Martin already waiting, Jay's armor already glistening as the young lad had cleaned it thoroughly. Egg preferred bright silver armor. Jaime's own set was a set that was golden gilded. Jay's, though, was like his father's and as dark as a moonless night. Where his father's had rubies on the breastplate, though, Jay's had none. He found the gems to be distracting, and so he had ordered his to be kept plain. It took him some time to be helped into the suit, Jay feeling the increased weight almost as soon as it was on him. It felt restrictive, as it always did, but he knew it was needed. The bruise he bore on his chest was clear enough evidence of that. He sent Martin to fetch Cartaxes, and turned around to face Sir Jaime, who looked both keenly interested and yet bored at the same time. It was a look that only he could pull off, Jay had found. Regretting not competing, sir? He asked as they waited. No, Jay. I'd not deny you the chance of victory on your name day, Jaime said with that cocky grin of his. Feel so sure you could beat me. I seem to remember beating you the last time, he replied with a grin of his own. And you the time before that, and what about that other time? Jaime said, making them both laugh. Among the many reasons he was happy to have Sir Jaime as his sworn shield, other than his martial prowess and the fact that he'd turned him into a better swordsman or jouster than even Sir Arthur had managed with Egg, was this. They had an easy camaraderie. The knight could be flippant, disrespectful, and downright annoying at times, and Jay much preferred that than Sir Arthur's dutifulness. Not that he didn't completely respect the Sword of the Morning, but more he felt him far better suited to be the Crown Prince's sworn shield than his own. Jaime cared not about how people saw him, some calling it the Lannister arrogance, but Jay knew better. It was because he was comfortable in himself. He knew who he was and what he was, and that despite his name, it was his talent that had brought him all he had. For a boy who was born a prince and whose own name meant so much, it gave him something to aspire to. He'd never be comfortable being what Egg needed to be. His brother was born to be a king. He was not. So he'd needed someone to show him, to teach him how to be what he needed to be, and there was no one better than Sir Jaime to do so. My prince, Martin said on his return, his squire still not ready to be informal. Shall we? He said, standing up and hearing Jaime's small chuckle. Bray. If we must, the knight said as they left the tent. The crowd was even bigger than it had been the day before, Jay thought, as he rode Caraxes out to great cheers. The red three-headed dragon was clear on the horse's barding as Jay brought him close to where his father and his family sat. Looking up to them, he offered them a bow and tried to find Marjorie, taking some time to see her. When he did, he could see that despite the warm smile she gave him, there was a sense of nervousness about her too. The way she was fidgeting with her hands, and how she sat more to the edge of her seat than usual. He reached down and placed his hand on his side, his fingers pointing to the green and gold handkerchief he had tied there, and he saw her relax some before he turned to ride towards Martin. "Your graces, my lords and ladies, I present to you the first semi-final of the joust, representing the Vale Lord Jan Royce, and representing the crown, the White Dragon, Prince Jaehaerys Targaryen." The herald set to loud cheers. Caraxes raced down the tilt yard, Jay's lance held high and poised to strike. Ahead of him, he could see Lord Jan was still suffering the effects of their last tilt and was favoring his left side. When the horses were no more than feet away from each other, Jay moved to the right and readied his strike, quickly shifting back once he saw Lord Jan move to compensate, and he knew then he had it won. Driving the lance forward, he felt the connection of his own and the brief glance of Lord Jan's off his shield, and then, as he passed the Lord, he saw him fall. Jay slowed Caraxes down to look back and see that Lord Jan was rising to his feet, and once he was sure he was unhurt, he turned to the crowd and waved before he then rode slowly from the field. He dismounted and patted Caraxes' head, thanking the horse for a fine ride once more. Then handing him off to Martin and telling him to make sure he was well watered. Jay then took off his helm and took up a position to watch the other semi-final, bidding both Sir Arthur and Loras good fortune when they passed by. "You rode well, Jay," Jaime said as Sir Arthur and Loras were announced by the herald. "Caraxes rode well. I just did what you taught me," he said. "Well, holding on is the key to winning, is it not?" Jaime said with a chuckle. Loras rode well, but watching Arthur was as always like watching poetry in motion, each glance of Loras's lance just being brushed aside while Loras did his best to hold on and managed to do so for 4 tilts before he was unhorsed. Jay almost ran to the field when it took some time for Loras to rise to his feet, his friend finally getting to his feet and limping towards them after a few moments. Jay helping him back to his tent where the maester examined him. "You'll need to rest that foot for a few days, Sir Loras, but there's no real damage, just bruising," the maester said once he was done. "It's just as well he's a terrible dancer then," Jay said, trying to garner a smile from his friend. "You wound me, my prince. Truly you do." "Of course. Then I only need to remember the first time you danced with my sister," Loras said, laughing. "In my defense, he began only to find he had none, and so he shook his head, looked Loras in the eye to see he was truly unhurt, and then moved to ready for his own ride. "Good luck, Jay," Loras called out as Jay walked from his tent. Less than an hour later, he was riding to the tilt yard beside Sir Arthur, the knight focused completely on their upcoming joust, and though he did wish Jay good fortune, they were the only words that Arthur spoke. Arthur, being so determined, did not bode well for him, and Jay felt his chances of winning dwindling. Still, he would give it his all. And as he rode out and looked to the crowd, he saw that Marjorie was on her feet cheering him on. "Your graces, my lords and ladies, we come to the grand final of the joust, representing the King's Guard, the Sword of the Morning, Sir Arthur Dane." Jay listened as the crowd cheered, Sir Arthur as popular as ever. Representing the crown, the White Dragon, Prince Jaehaerys Targaryen. The cheers were as loud, if not louder, and Jay felt Caraxes stir beneath him, reaching down to calm the horse before he rode to take the lance from Martin's hands. At the signal he rode and rode fast, soon feeling the impact of the lance against his shield and the shiver it sent up his arm. His own had glanced off Sir Arthur's shield harmlessly, barely having hit it. The second and third tilts were the same, Jay feeling his hold on his shield weakening and knowing he'd not even caused Sir Arthur a moment's distress. This changed in the fourth. And whether it was a lucky strike or not, Jay felt Sir Arthur shift in his saddle when his lance caught the knight square in the chest. As he rode down for the fifth, Jay gave Caraxes a little kick and felt him quicken. He readied his lance, and as he reached Sir Arthur, he saw he was a fraction quicker than the Dornish knight. Giving everything he had to the strike, He almost fell over Caraxus's head, so far forward did he thrust, but to his relief, he found it had been worth it. An almost hush came over the crowd as Sir Arthur fell. Jay then, hearing the loudest cheers he'd ever heard in his life as it became clear that he'd won. "Your graces, my lords and ladies, the victor of the joust, the White Dragon, Prince Jaehaerys Targaryen," the herald said loudly over the cheers. Jay looked up to see his father was smiling broadly. Egg, Ray, Danny, Viserys were all cheering enthusiastically, while Elia and his grandmother looked at him proudly. As he looked to Marjorie, he could see others in the crowd were looking her way, and so he moved to where the garland was and picked it up with his lance before riding towards her. He could see she was breathing in deep breaths. Her brown eyes were sparkling and slightly wet, and her lips pursed the closer he got to her. Raising the lance, he moved it in her direction and watched as the garland began to slowly slide towards her. "Lady Marjorie, I would name you the Queen of Love and Beauty," he said as she took the garland and placed the golden crown of roses on her head. Jay, seeing the smile she wore, and then having to blink when the colors of the flowers changed from gold to blue, opening his eyes to see they were gold once more. King's Landing, 298 AC. Joy. She was angry and had refused to eat, had called her father and uncle names which she didn't mean, and had refused to go to her lessons. Jenna had called her a child, told her that she was acting like a babe and not a grown lady, and she had cared not. Cregan had looked at her disappointedly, as had her father, and she had cared not. Only Balerion understood, only he knew, and so it was only he that she listened to. "You're right, Balin, they're wrong. So what if I'm acting spoiled? I am spoiled. Then they should let me see him, shouldn't they?" The one-sided conversation she had with the cat always made her feel better. He didn't judge, or tell her to act a lady or to grow up and be who she needed to be. Balerion was just like Jon, and he let her be herself, even when she was wrong, and others may be right. She'd understood why they'd not let her in to see him at first. He was ill, she'd heard. She wasn't a fool. The Grand Maester and the Prince had both gone to see Jon more than once. She knew he was ill, and that they didn't wish her to see. But what about what I wish? What about that? I need to see him. I need to know he's getting better. I need to kiss him and make him beller. She said, holding Balerion tightly in her arms. The days stretched on, and that she wasn't the only one who didn't get to see him didn't make it feel any better to her. What cared she that Arya or Sansa didn't get to see Jon, or that Martin, Willem, or Tommen did not either? She wanted to see him, and she knew he'd want to see her. He always had. He always did. When she was ill, or if she felt bad, it was Jon who'd come to see her and try and make her feel better. Why wouldn't they allow her to do the same for him? She ate because she knew it worried them when she did not. Though she had no appetite, and she found herself wondering if Jon could eat or not. At night she slept, though it took her time to fall to sleep, her tears and worried thoughts keeping her awake for most of the night. As the days went on, she still refused to go to her lessons and had been sent to her room more than once. When she was not being punished in some way, then she and Balerion would go and stand as close to Jon's room as they were allowed to go. Joy had tried to move closer, but when she did, they'd move her to one of the other rooms, or send for her father or Ashara, and she'd be taken back to their own. So now she moved close, but not too close, to where she could see the room, but where they'd not move her from. When she saw Loras go into the room, she had followed him back from it, sure he'd bring her inside. "Can you take me with you next time?" she asked as he walked beside. "I can't, Joy. No one is to see him," Loras said, shaking his head. "You got to see him," she said accusingly. I did. "But you'll see him soon," Loras said, smiling a fake smile at her as he did so. "Soon, that's all any of you say, soon. I want to see him now," she said loudly. "Joy," Loras said, moving towards her. but she brushed his hand away and ran down the corridor, finding Balerion running into a room a little ahead of her. Entering the room, she saw Balerion in the corner, his head turned towards her, and then he moved to the wall and was gone. Gone. Panicked, she ran over and saw his head come out from the wall, Balerion looking to her before he went back into it. "You want me to come?" she asked, though he was already gone and wasn't there to answer. Not that he ever did. She took a quick look around her and then followed after Balerion, feeling the wall close behind her and then realizing that it was a door and not a wall. It was dark, but she could see Balerion's eye in the distance. Joy moved quickly after him, not wishing to be here alone in the dark. She lost him when he turned his head away from her and began to worry that she'd not find him again, only to feel him rub up against her legs. Seeing the light in front of her, she ran to it and found it was a torch. It took her some time to find something to climb onto so that she could reach it, and once she did, she saw Balerion race on ahead. She followed after the black cat, the torch in her hand not letting him disappear again. And after what felt like hours, they came to another door. Balerion ducked inside and then back out just as quickly again, and when Joy tried to walk through it, the cat hissed loudly at her. Why are you angry with me?" she said sadly, and then felt Balerion rub against her once more, the cat showing that it wasn't anger that he felt, but something else. "You're warning me? It's not time yet, is it?" she asked, feeling the cat's tongue lick her hand. She sat down on the ground and Balerion snuggled up against her, Joy welcoming the feel of his soft fur on her face as she held him on her knees and leaned down against him. Her eyes opened, and she found that it was to darkness. Joy sure she'd fallen asleep, and looking to see that the torch had gone out. Balerion was nowhere to be seen or felt, and she worried once again, only to hear a noise and look up and see the cat's eye in the darkness ahead of her. Rising to her feet, she moved toward him and was soon past the door and inside a room. The lights were low, but at least she could see again. Balerion led the way and she followed quietly behind him, opening another door and then she almost ran to the bed when she saw him. He was sleeping. He didn't look ill or unwell, and he was alone. Why had they left him alone? He shouldn't be alone. They wouldn't let her see him, and yet he was alone, she thought angrily as she moved to the bed. "You're not alone anymore, John. I'm here," she said as she climbed up on the bed and lay down beside him. "King's Landing? What? Evening. Prince Jaehaerys Targaryen." He buttoned up his dark red shirt and reached over to grab his coat, putting it on and standing in front of a looking glass to make sure he was presentable. His father had asked to speak to him before they headed to the night's feasting, and Jay wondered what it was to be about. Opening his door, he saw that Sir Jaime had already changed, and he wondered how he had managed to do and be back so quickly. Looking at him, he shook his head and decided that it was yet another secret of the night's he would need to figure out some other time. Walking down the corridor, he was tempted to stop by Ray's room to speak to her. He and his sister had not had much time together today, and after the present she'd made for him, which he now wore, he felt bad about that. However, his father's wishes took precedence, and so he continued on, finding Sir Barristan and Sir Jonathor to be on duty tonight. "Is His Grace inside?" he asked, seeing Sir Jonathor nod and that he wore an odd smirk on his face. Opening the door and walking inside, he quickly found the reason for that smirk as he looked and saw that his father wasn't alone. Lady Olenna, Lord Mace, and Marjorie were all sitting alongside his father, Elia, and his grandmother, Jay, looking at them all nervously as he moved to take a seat. He bid the Tyrells to remain in their seats when they went to rise. Protocol needed to be observed in front of his father, but he'd long ago talked them out of where he was concerned. "Ah, the man of the hour," his father said, his voice light, and Jay could see there was both pride and mirth in his eyes. "I got lucky. Another day and it would have been Sir Arthur who won," he said, trying to sound far more modest than he actually felt about his victory. But not today, Elias said, and he smiled warmly at her. Jaehaerys, it's been clear to us all how you felt for Lady Marjorie, and you, for some time. Political reasons, though, have delayed us agreeing to anything formal regarding a betrothal between you both, as well, you know, his father said, and Jay felt his heart begin to beat a little faster. I'm aware of that, father, he said, his voice barely a whisper. Now that you've reached your majority and the realm is far more stable, those political reasons are lessened. Your uncle Viserys and Princess Arianne are to be wed, which gives me leave to now make a match based both on politics and one which I believe will make my son happy. So later tonight, we'll be announcing your betrothal to Lady Marjorie, his father said, smiling beamingly at him. Jay looked around the room. He could see that Lady Olenna and Lord Mace were both incredibly happy by this news, and that his grandmother and Elia both seemed to be just as pleased. Marjorie looked nervously to him, and Jay didn't understand why that was for a few moments. Boy, so wrapped up was he in how he was feeling that he didn't see that she perhaps thought he was having second thoughts, or may not now wish the match. Nothing could be further from the truth. It was not just the match he had waited for years to be confirmed. It was the only match he had ever wanted. He'd understood with Egg marrying Daenerys that this created issues. 2 royal matches being denied to the realm undoubtedly would. That it left him, Rhaea and Viserys, as the ones most would seek out was only made truer because of it. He, as second in line for the throne, also made him a more valuable match than even his sister or uncle. So despite his feelings, despite the fact that he felt politically it was the best match available to him and his family, he'd waited and hoped that his father wouldn't decide that he needed to marry another. Jay, wanting to be loyal but not sure if he'd been asked, that he could have been able to take anyone other than Marjorie for his wife. Jaehaerys, his father said, his voice a little concerned, and Jay turned to see that Marjorie looked to be on the verge of tears. Forgive me, father, my happiness knows no bounds. I've wished for this for so long that He stumbled over his words and moved to Marjorie, seeing the tears that now fell were tears of joy and not those of worry or sadness that had been threatening to fall just moments before. He took a knee and reached out and took her hands in his own, the rest of the people in the room fading away as he looked into her eyes. I love you, Marjorie, more than anything in this world. I love you. I always have, and I'm so very happy that you're to be my wife, he said, smiling up at her as he knelt in front of her. And you, Jay, she said shakily. I love you always, she added a little later when she composed herself. After they had spoken for a few moments, Marjorie was asked to join with him and his family as they walked to the throne room for the night's feast. Ostensibly, the feast was in celebration of his name day and partly his victory in the joust. But now it had taken on a completely different meaning. His betrothal was to be announced, and he was to be officially named as the Prince of Summerhall. He quickly told Ray, Egg, and Dany, and then went to speak to Viserys. His own betrothal had somewhat paved the way for his after all. Thanking his uncle, he moved back and took Marjorie's arm in his own as they were introduced and walked into the throne room together. Jane knew it was perfectly clear now to everyone that the betrothal was coming, just as for years his feelings for her had been well known to all. He looked out to see if any seemed surprised, annoyed, or upset by her placement at the high table, and was relieved to find there didn't seem to be anyone that was. They ate, and he sent dishes to tables and nods to those who received them. Once done, he got gifts from his family, from friends, and from Marjorie herself, though he barely saw any of them, and none could match the gift his father had given him earlier that night. When his father stood up and made the dual announcement, Jay was happy to hear those present clap and cheer, and happier still a few moments later when the dancing began. He reached out to take her hand and led her out onto the floor, finding himself keen both to hold her in his arms and to speak to her without anyone else listening in. Jay needing to find out how she was truly feeling about everything that had occurred. "You are happy with this, with us?" he asked as they began to move, a slight note of worry in his voice. "More than happy," she said to his relief. When Father told us, I got so lost in the thoughts of what it would mean that what I wished for more than anything in this world was to come true. That," he said, looking into her eyes. "I know, for a moment I thought," she said, her voice trailing off, "but I know how you feel about me, Jay. I feel it too for you. I love you. I have from the first moment I saw you," she said, smiling at him. "Really? Really? That gangly boy who could barely speak to you?" he said with a chuckle. "That boy who looked at me like no one ever has, who took the time to get to know me and share my interests, who each day I've only fallen more and more in love with," she said. He leaned in and kissed her. Damn protocol, or what anyone may think, Jay. Feeling her lips on his as he began to imagine the future they'd have together. The nudge in his ribs came from behind him, and he turned to see Ray and Egg dancing close to them, his sister having been the one to stop the kiss. "Lord Mace and Lady Olenna are watching you. Brother and neither looks best pleased," Ray whispered, and Jay glanced at their table, seeing that she was right. "We're to be wed, Ray. Let them look," he said, receiving a smile from Marjorie in return. They were big words. He spoke, and he knew that despite them, he'd not kiss her again so publicly. He'd found favor with the Tyrells because he'd acted honorably, regardless of how he felt, and he'd not act dishonorably now. So after a couple of more dances with Marjorie, and one each with Ray and Danny, Jay walked from the room to get some fresh air, only to see her once again. The woman walked ahead of him with the white wolf by her side, and then she turned and looked at him before smiling and beckoning him forward. "Jay, Jay," he thought he heard a voice call out from behind him as he moved to follow, and when he looked back he saw Marjorie standing with Ray. Both of them were beckoning him towards them, while ahead of him the woman was doing likewise. Jay saw her face clearly then, her dark gray eyes and dark brown hair. There was a certain wildness about them that he felt to be familiar. He turned back to see Marjorie was holding out her hand, her fingers moving as she bid him her way, and then he turned to see the white wolf had turned its head also. Its deep red eyes were looking so intently at him that Jay felt it was looking deep into his very soul, and so he began to move towards him and the woman and further away from those behind him. King's Landing, 298 AC, Marjorie. Each day he didn't wake increased her worry, and were it not for the fact that her family, Jay's family, and Ghost were there with her, then she'd have probably lost her mind by now. She woke up each morning and immediately checked to see if there had been any change, only to find herself disappointed each time. Marjorie had felt something different when Ned Stark came to speak to him, listening in as he told tales of Jay's mother, and though there was no movement or obvious change, she'd felt something had happened. It had given her hope that he'd wake that first night, so much so that after kissing him goodnight and telling him that she loved him, she laid his clothes out for him to wear the next morning, only to once again wake and find there was no change, and Jay was still not waking. Her mother and grandmother would come and sit with her from time to time, both of them doing their best to comfort her, and her grandmother would even sit by the bed and speak to Jay. Marjorie, listening as she would tell him what was going on in the realm. Loras, too, would spend almost as much time with her and Jay as he did on duty. As soon as he was done, he would come into the room and take a seat to speak to them both, while Marjorie lay in the bed holding her husband's hand. Her brother had a knack for being able to hold a conversation with Jay as if he was getting answers or responses to the things he said, so much so that at times Marjorie looked and almost expected Jay to be sitting up and awake. When she did leave the room, which was as little as possible, it was to inform others of Jay's progress or lack of it. Marjorie taking time to speak to Sansa and Arya, to Jenna and Ashara, and to Oberyn, Alaria, and his daughters. Other than Jaime, it was perhaps Oberyn who offered her the most support, both emotionally and practically. The two of them had taken to ensure the realm was not forgotten, or the people neglected, and Oberyn's own conversations with Jay actually brought her amusement, or as much as she'd allow them to bring her. Many years ago, nephew, when I was no older than you are now, and my mother still lived, Elia and I took a trip to Hellholt. It was the first time I ever saw Alaria, and looking back upon it now, I find myself thinking what a fool I was. I'd not yet truly, how shall I put it, spread my seed. Oberyn said. Oberyn. Marjorie sat with a small grin on her face. Whether it was the northerner in Jay or that he'd grown up surrounded by strong women, her husband always blushed when someone else spoke of sex. He was no prude, far from it, and when they were alone his tongue could be wicked, both in its words and its deeds. But someone was speaking of sex in front of him, especially in her presence, and her husband would turn a shade of red that she found most becoming. Alaria was as beautiful then as she is now. You know what I mean. Nephew, you found your own beauty, and once you have, then none other will ever compare. Oberyn said, looking over at her, causing her to blush a little. But I was a foolish boy, nephew, a foolish boy who thought he knew better, and so while her beauty attracted me, I did nothing, and it was many years later when we finally were joined together. She looked on as Oberyn seemed to almost drift off for a moment, his eyes looking off somewhere in the distance, and she wondered if he was remembering Alaria then, or the day he spoke of, only to find out it was only partly both. Elia, though, Jay, your aunt, she knew it from the moment she looked at me. She knew it. She called me out on it, called me a fool to my face, and I proved her right by not listening to her. Marjorie heard the chuckle that came from Oberyn and felt him move closer to the bed, his hand touching Jay's face so softly that she thought her husband would feel as if a soft breeze was blowing. I have lost too much of my family, nephew. Nephew, I will lose no more. My niece and your uncle are to wed, and both Arianne and Tyrion will wish you there. I wish you there. My daughters wish to grow up and become the desert roses that their cousin named them, and for him to see them become so. And Alaria and I, Jay, thanks to you we can wed. We can do something that was, I'm more of a man I'd have done so many years ago. Thanks to you I can finally call her my wife, and no longer my paramour. I need you there. Alaria needs you there. Do not disappoint me or your aunt. Come back to us. Come back to your wife, Jaehaerys Targaryen. She had gone to speak to Alaria to find it true, the woman both overjoyed and worried at the same time. Oberyn had apparently asked her not long after her one and only visit to see Jay, Alaria not having reacted well to seeing him lying in the bed. So, why that was Marjorie. Was unsure, but it had convinced her that she was right not to allow the children to see him in such a state. It was hard enough seeing the looks of worry and concern in the eyes of those old enough to understand. She didn't think she could bear to see something similar in Sansa or Arya's eyes, and she knew that she could not in Joy's. Other than the children, it was the dragons whose reaction worried her most, Rhaenys most of all. And were it not for Ghost, then she'd have worried what Jay's sister would have done by now. The other 4 dragons, even Lygaron thanks to Tyrion, seemed to have calmed. Rhaenys without Jay had very much not. Her wings could be heard as she flew over the Red Keep each day, Marjorie knowing that people looked to the sky and watched the white dragon as she circled Maegor's holdfast. At night the noises she made would resonate through the walls of the Red Keep itself, sounds of anger, of pain, and of sadness. Ghost would get up from the bed and Marjorie would let him out. Jaime told her that the White Wolf would head to the dragon pit and Rhaenys would follow and meet him there. When morning arrived, she'd find Ghost was back at her door and Rhaenys to be flying over the Red Keep once more. The routine never changing until tonight when instead of heading for the door, Ghost moved to the balcony and looked at her before grabbing onto her sleeve to drag her towards it. "Ghost, no," she said, shaking her hand away from her and dislodging his grip on her only for the wolf to grab her once more, the look in his red eyes, one she felt was almost begging her to follow. Reluctantly, she did so, walking with the wolf to the balcony and looking out on the early evening's fading light. She almost jumped back when Rhaenys flew so close to the balcony that the wind from her wings caused her to close her eyes, Marjorie opening them when the dragon had passed, only for Rhaenys to fly back a few moments later and do the same. This time she was more prepared, though, and she kept her eyes open, soon finding them looking into the deep purple of Rhaenys' own as she passed by. On and on this went, and for how long she knew not. At one point she reached out, and with a little bit of stretching touched the dragon's scales. All the while Rhaenys would look at her and ghost at them both, all three of them somehow sharing their concerns with each other. As the light faded away, Ghost turned and walked inside, and Rhaenys flew by one last time before she headed off to what Marjorie assumed was the dragon pit. She stayed on the balcony for just a few moments longer, feeling a sense of sadness come over her as she thought about the white dragon. She could at least touch Jay. Rhaenys hadn't seen or felt her brother in almost 2 weeks, and Marjorie wondered if there was something that could be done to rectify that. The voice startled her, and she ran into the room and readied to call for the guards, only to see who it was who was speaking before she did so. How she'd gotten in here was beyond her, and it was something that would need to be addressed. Marjorie, knowing that there was no way the King's Guard had left the door unguarded with she and Jay inside, just as she was about to make her presence felt, though she heard the words that Joy spoke, and it caused her to stop and listen, rather than make it clear that she was there. "Apples misses you, John. Winter, too, we were supposed to have our ride, remember? Balin, too, he led me to you. They wouldn't let me see you, but I knew you'd want me to come. They left you alone. I'd never leave you alone. They wouldn't let me see you, John. And when I did come, I find you're alone. You want me to tell you a story? Once upon a time in a castle far, far away there lived a little girl named Joy. She was all alone until one day..." Chapsir. Marjorie listened as Joy told a story that she was certain was a different version of the one Jay had told the girl many times. A tale of a beautiful young girl who could ride like the wind, and of the boy who was her brother. She felt the tears falling down her cheeks, both from the thoughts of how much it was apparent that Joy had truly needed to see Jay, and that she'd kept her away from him. Wiping her eyes, she moved into the room and lay down on the bed beside them both, Joy realizing that Jay hadn't been alone and giving her a small smile as she continued to tell her story. Beyond the wall, 298 AC. Bloodraven. A mind was a wondrous thing, and the boy's mind only proved this more than any. Brendan, feeling the power that resonated within him, and his own power, almost feeling inconsequential next to it. That he'd only begun to tap into it, both scared and excited him, as he began to wonder just what he could do with this power when he added it to his knowledge. For now, though he couldn't access it and could only witness it instead, he watched as the boy warred first without knowing what he was doing, then as he learned, and then when he unleashed the full extent of that power, both unwillingly and then willingly. Brendan saw the dragons being born, and a use of magic that he'd never been able to master. He'd seen it before, of course, saw dragons born and had seen them die, but never had he seen it so, and never had he felt the magic required to make it so. When he saw how easily the boy lit the glass candles, how he in far less time than Brendan had mastered the present and the past with them, he felt relieved that he'd not yet mastered the future, as he felt him warg into people. First the giant boy who was supposed to hold the door so he could escape, then the giant monster, and then the 2 Dornishmen, each time using different forces, as again he did so willingly and unwillingly he was amazed. Controlled and uncontrolled. The power of each staggered his mind, though it was nothing compared to the controlled power the boy used on the woman. Even he had not yet mastered being able to manipulate dreams, so Brendan was almost using a blunt tourney sword while the boy used Dark Sister, his cuts running far deeper than Brendan's ever had. For all he could see, though there were things that the boy blocked from him, hidden things which only made Brendan keener to get to them. The boy's dreams were of nameless, faceless shadows, much to Brendan's annoyance. No matter how hard he tried, he was unable to see them. He did see the book, the one he'd always known where it was, but the one he had never been able to get close to. Brendan saw it, saw the room at Dragonstone easily open to the boy where it would not to him. And as he tempered his jealousy over that, he found that his annoyance at not being able to see what was written within it only rose ever higher. He felt it then, a tapping on the wall, a brick coming loose, and then another, and so he left this part of the boy's mind alone and moved quickly to the prison instead. It was odd, this sense of panic, this worry which threatened to overtake him. 4 times in his life he'd felt it. The first time was in Redgrass Field, when his brother had almost taken his life. Brendan had felt it again when he'd lost his love and finally realized that this time it was for true, and then again, but a few years ago, when a white dragon had chased him from Winterfell and had forced him back beyond the wall. It was an even more urgent feeling now, and as he moved he soon found that the wall was crumbling. The prison he'd so painstakingly built was beginning to fall. He ran and knew he was going to be too late, and then he began to hear the words before he got there. He who controls the past controls the future. He who controls the present controls the past, and you control neither. I'm coming for you, uncle. I'm coming for you, and I bring you only fire and blood. Joan, J. Harris said, and Brendan turned to run away, holding meetings, answering questions that he knew not. The answer to and seeing the looks on people's faces as they met with him rather than the king or queen was not how he'd envisioned his days. That he was apparently doing a decent enough job of it didn't make him feel any better about it either. Jaime doing what he must rather than what he wished to do. And were it not for Daisy and Joanna, for Jenna, and surprisingly for Oberyn Martell, he didn't know if he'd have been able to. Every instinct in him wished him to be by Jay's side, and yet he knew he could not do so, and was as needed as much, if not more, here as he was there. The realm needed stability, and though he wanted to spend his days with the boy he thought of as his son, it was up to him to provide that stability. So once again he woke early and kissed his wife on the lips and on her swollen belly, before walking into Joanna's room and kissing her forehead as she slept. Jaime cursing that he needed to rise before them, and yet, just as he had for the last 2 weeks, he did just that. After he dressed, he made his way to his solar and began the painstaking process of writing out missives and orders, all so that the simple day-to-day business of the realm could carry on without stoppages or delays. Daisy arrived to order him to lunch, just as she had each day for this past week, Jaime finding that his appetite was both ravenous and non-existent at times, as his worries for Jay increased each day that he didn't wake up. He'd been certain he would have by now, so much so that he had no difficulty, at least early on, in reassuring Marjorie that all would be well, something that was now getting harder and harder for any of them to do. "Come eat," Daisy said, and he nodded as he left the last of the papers unsigned and followed her to their small dining room, looking at Joanna smile happily at him as they ate at their small table, gave him temporary respite from his troubled thoughts. As did watching Daisy eat in the least ladylike manner possible, his wife's hunger knowing few bounds and Jaime believing like her mother did, that it truly was a bear she carried. When he would stop and not eat as he sat with them, Joanna would reach out and take something from her own plate and hold it up to him. His daughter, just like her mother, wouldn't let him go hungry. "Eat, Papa," Joanna said, and while the piece of cheese she held didn't look very appetizing to him, just looking at his daughter, he knew he was lost and could refuse her nothing. "Thank you, little cub," he said, and was rewarded with the brightest smile he'd ever seen. His daughter's was one that could make him move the very mountains themselves, he'd always thought. "More, Papa?" Joanna asked. "Aye, more," he said before he lifted her from her seat and began blowing on her neck, Joanna's laughter like a balm to his soul. They ate and played, or truth be told, played far more than they ate, and then Sarah came to take his daughter to her lessons. Jamie, kissing her cheeks, repeated while she laughed and then allowing the servant to take her from him. "You spoil her," Daisy said, still eating. "I'm a Lannister, the head of the wealthiest house in Westeros and hand of the king. If I can't spoil our daughter, then who can?" He asked and saw Daisy's small smirk. "True enough. Have you much more to do today?" Daisy asked. "Petitions and a small council meeting. And Jay?" she asked, looking at him. "And Jay," he said. After he finished his food and took a large swallow of the warmed milk, he walked over and kissed his wife once more, his hand automatically going to her belly and rubbing it before he moved away from her, bidding her farewell, for now he headed to the throne room to hear the petitions, and for the next few hours he did just that. Jamie sighing when it was clear that word was beginning to spread about the king's illness and the queen's reluctance to leave his side. When he was done, he headed straight to the small council chambers, finding Oberyn and Olenna to be the only ones inside. Jamie cursing himself for forgetting that Sir Richard had left to travel to Braavos with Willis and Wyman. Had he remembered that and the fact that Lord Montfort was readying the fleet to take Asha Greyjoy to the Iron Islands, then he'd have held this meeting in his solar, rather than at the large table with just he, Olenna, and Oberyn present. The very small council. Oberyn said with a chuckle as Jamie took his seat. "Indeed," he said. "Is there actually much that we need to discuss?" Olenna asked. "Nothing of any great import, though I wish Sir Richard was here," he said, looking at them both. "Oh!" "People are beginning to speak," Oberyn asked. "Questions are being raised. The lords and ladies we can deal with. The small folk, though, he left the rest unsaid. Sir Richard's men, perhaps they can be used?" Olenna said. "The Red Priests, too," Oberyn said, catching him by surprise. "The Red Priests?" he asked. "Thoros and Lady Melisandre. They've gathered quite a following. People have even begun work converting one of the warehouses down on the docks into a temple." Oberyn said. "Since when?" he asked, stunned. "From as soon as Lady Melisandre arrived from Dragonstone. Jay promised her that he'd allow them the freedom to teach their religion as long as they followed certain rules, and word has spread that they helped our king while he was hidden," Oberyn said. "Word spread by them, no doubt," Olenna said, annoyed. "Word spread all the same, Olenna," Oberyn said. "Sir Richard's men?" he asked, looking to Olenna. "Sir Jareth, I believe, is the main one, though given how secretive the Order of Skulls and Kisses is, that may just be what they wish me to believe," Olenna said with a smirk. "I can trust you to speak to him then, Lady Olenna?" he asked, and she nodded. "And you, the Red Priests, Oberyn? You can. What it is you wish of them?" Oberyn asked. "Have them let it be known that Jay is recovering, and that this is not something they need to be overly concerned about. Let them know that both the king and queen will soon be appearing to speak to them, and that their absence is because of them being newlywed." Jamie said. "And we're sure they both will be returning to their duties soon?" Oberyn asked concernedly. "We can hope," he said, seeing the nods from both of them. They discussed other considerations of the realm, Jaime telling them that he'd received the raven from the Vale and that Harold Harding was on his way to swear his fealty, and Olenna asking about Catelyn Tully, only for Jaime to shake his head and refuse to speak on her. Jay would deal with her when he awoke, and it would be to the lady's benefit that it was him that did so, were it left to any of them in this room. Then Catelyn Tully wouldn't live for long, and Oberyn had already suggested many ways of seeing to her end. From now on, we'll speak in one of our solas until the others have returned, Jaime said. And Olenna and Oberyn both agree before he turned to walk from the room, leaving them both sitting there and speaking to each other. He was heading to Jay's rooms when he was asked to go to meet with his aunt, Jaime wondering what it was that she wished to speak to him about, and knowing now that he'd be back with Daisy and Joanna much later than he had hoped to be. Jenna had taken over the running of the Red Keep itself, the household, the stores, the servants, and stewards, all answering to her so as to remove those duties from Marjorie's shoulders. As he reached her door, he hoped that it was those she wished to speak to him on, but he knew it would not be. "You wish to see me?" he said as he walked into the room, Jenna sitting at her desk filling out countless papers. "I do. You heard what your cousin did?" she asked with a soft smile on her face. "No? Wait, which cousin?" he asked as he took a seat. "Joy, of course." Apparently, she found her way into Jay and Marjorie's rooms. The Queen returned from the balcony and found her lying in her bed speaking to Jay. "Bright." Jenna said, her smile fuller now. "The little minx," he said with a chuckle. "Wait, when was this?" "Last night. I collected her this morning, and Marjorie has agreed to let her come back during the day and later tonight," Jenna said, and Jaime nodded. "And that's what you wish to speak to me about?" "No. That's just something I wish to tell you. What I want to speak on is the trout." His aunt said, her voice and face much different now, and Jaime could see the humor that had been clear in both was now completely gone. "Will be dealt with when Jay awakens," he said. "I wish to speak to her," Jenna said. "Aunt, I won't harm her, not physically, though it will take all I have in me not to. I wish to speak to her, Jaime. See it done." "I don't know if that's such a good idea," he said, looking at her and shaking his head. "I don't care. See it done," she said almost dismissively. He sat there for a few moments thinking it over, knowing that his aunt wished to give Catelyn Tully a piece of her mind and that she was not alone in this. Daisy, Ashara, Olenna, and were it not for Jay's condition, he suspected even Marjorie herself would all wish to do likewise. After a moment's thought, he began to think it wasn't such a bad idea. After all, the woman deserved to be spoken down to, and there was no one more qualified to do so than Jenna. "Very well, I'll arrange it for the morrow," he said, rising from his seat. "Thank you," his aunt said softly. Oh. As he was walking to the door, he heard her cough, and he turned back to look at her, Jenna staring at him as if she was about to say something. And then, just when he thought she would not, she did. "Give him my love, Jaime," she said as she lowered her head, her voice soft, and Jaime said he would before he left to go and sit with Jay for a little bit, before he would head back to his rooms. King's Landing. 298 AC, Sansa. None of them had been allowed to see him, not her, not Arya or Robb, Martin, Willem, or Joy. None of the children had been allowed inside, and despite the many protests she made, the angry ones that Arya had, or the more reasoned ones that Robb put forth, her father and the others wouldn't relent. Each day, they were simply told that he was recovering, and they'd see him soon, and Sansa felt it to be true, telling both Arya and Robb of how it was when he'd fallen in the Riverlands, and how for days on end she'd sat by his bed and just watched him sleep. She told them that it had seemed as if he'd never wake up, but that after almost 2 weeks, John had, and his recovery afterward was total and complete. It didn't reassure them or her as much as she hoped, and Sansa found she missed not having Willis by her side to offer her the same reassurances. Each day that passed only made her worries rise and Arya act out more and more, not even their father's threats of discipline calming her sister's anger. If it hadn't been for the wolves, then she doubted anything could have. Fang, Nymeria, and Grey Wind all refusing to leave their sides for more than a few moments at a time, and Sansa grateful for that, and for the ability to get lost in her wolf's mind as well. She'd found that when she did so, her worries reduced somewhat, and whether it was that Fang didn't worry in the same way as she did, or that the wolf knew more than her, she couldn't be sure. What she was sure of, though, was that it allowed her to think that John would recover, and that despite it taking longer for him to do so, it didn't mean what she believed it to. Whatever it was that was going on with her brother was something that he needed to do, and so she chose to believe that and to share it with both Robb and Arya. John is fighting Arya. It's a fight we can't take part in, but it's a fight he will win, she said as they all sat in her room. How do you know? How could you? You've not seen him. None of us has. Arya said, her anger as always tinged with the worry she felt. The wolves know, Arya. John told me that many years ago. They know more than we, and we need to trust that they're right, now and always. I don't understand, Robb said, looking her way. Sansa did her very best to explain it, how she'd been in Fang and how it had felt, and that she was certain that she was right. Both Robb and Arya making her doubt it, though, when they said that perhaps she was believing what she wished to and not what was the truth. So she did the only thing she knew to do. She told them to warg and to see it for themselves. Robb got up and locked the door. Even though most near them knew of their warging, they decided it was for the best if they kept it to those who understood. Sansa, having remembered the conversation she'd had with Lady Olenna when she'd explained what it was like to warg and the advice the woman had given her. The Faith would not think so highly on this. The Citadel either. The North is already thought of disparagingly by some in the South. I too felt that way at one time, Olenna said, looking at her. You think I should keep it to myself? She asked. It's for the best that you're due, Sansa. Besides, some secrets are fun to keep, are they not? Willis had told her likewise, as had John, who'd also explained that his family had always been looked warily upon because of the dragons, and it had led some to lash out at them, or thinking them to be against the nature of the gods. Wargs may be a known thing, Sansa, in the North and in books, but it's one thing to know of them, and another to see them prove true. There are those in the realm who fear magic and would seek to harm those who possess it, and trust me, little sister, it's magic that we possess. So for now, at least, it was best. It was kept secret, and once Robb had locked the door and returned to his seat, she, her brother, and sister closed their eyes and were soon in their wolves. She lay on the ground, her wild sister and swift brother beside her. Their quiet brother lay beside his 2 foot, while mother followed after her own. The fierce brother sat by a fire and chewed on a bone, his 2 foot speaking to him as he brushed his coat. Far away in the north, their wise brother ran free through the woods, and she could almost sense the beating of his heart as he engaged in the hunt. Looking to her wild sister and swift brother, she saw they felt it too, the presence that was coming their way and getting ever closer. She could feel their excitement when they realized who it was, and she wondered if Mother knew Father was on the way. Her wild sister seemed upset, and so she moved to her and rubbed her head against her, the swift brother doing likewise, and she knew then it was because of the quiet brother's 2 foot. He was there, but not there. Here, but not here, and though her wild sister and swift brother worried about him, the quiet brother did not, and so she pointed them to him. Sansa opened her eyes and saw that Arya and Robb still had theirs closed, and so she waited until they were done and had come back to themselves before she spoke. "Did you feel it?" she asked, and saw Rob nod and Arya smile a little, the first one she'd seen on her sister's face in quite a number of days. "He'll recover," Arya said. "Aye, he will. And then he'll deal with Mother," Rob said. And Sansa felt her joy at their relief soon begin to fade. Jon being ill had in some ways been a good thing, as it had allowed them to forget the fact that their mother was now here and would soon need to be dealt with. Her crimes were many and numerous, and each of them had agreed that she needed to pay for them, though all of them had different ideas of how much she needed to pay. Surprisingly, it was Arya who spoke up more for her than she or Rob did, her little sister not knowing as much about what their mother had done as either of them. Sansa was both reluctant to tell her and knew that she had needed to know the full extent of what their mother had been a part of. When Jon had told them what he planned to do, she had sat quietly and listened and had found herself at odds with him. Her mother had tried to kill him, had cost Alliers his life, and had that been all then, that would have been enough. But Sansa remembered how she'd acted when she tried to have him killed again, what she had said and how she had behaved, and even after it all she'd still tried to deny her brother what was his by right. She'd sat and listened and kept her own counsel, wishing for nothing more than to stand up and scream out how wrong it all was. How she didn't deserve mercy or forgiveness or a single one of their tears, and how if she'd have had her way, then they'd be mourning Jon and not worrying about her fate. She'd wished to, but she had not. And though she disagreed completely with what Jon had decided, Sansa had accepted it. He was her brother, and it was he who'd been harmed, and so it was his choice alone to make. "She's getting off easy," she said to a gasp from Arya and a worried look from Rob. "Sansa," Rob said, looking at her. "No, Rob, what she did, what she tried to do, if it were anyone but her, then she'd lose her head. You understand that and how this will make Jon look. She is our mother, and I loved her once. Perhaps deep down inside I love her still. But were she not, if she was someone else's, that would you worry so about her fate? But she's not someone else's mother. She's ours," Arya said, and Sansa saw her sister wipe her eye. "And she tried to harm the pack, Arya. She tried to kill Jon, to break the pack up," she said, looking to her sister. When they left, she knew she'd not changed their minds on their mother, though she took comfort that she'd at least managed to alleviate their concerns about Jon. Sansa lay back down on her bed and hoping that her brother would awake soon and that Willis would return unharmed. Bravos 298 AC. Willis. His cane hit the ground as he moved through the city, Willis making his first visit to Bravos, as was Sir Richard, while Lord Wyman had come here many times. Both of them had been happy to find out. It had taken them 3 days to receive an audience with the Iron Bank, Willis finding himself incredibly annoyed at the wait, though Sir Richard had welcomed it, the man disappearing into the city more than once since they'd arrived. Their prisoner had behaved impeccably throughout, Willis certain it was the fact that Jay had allowed him to keep his own gold and that they were only taking the company's. Gory still wearing an almost king's ransom in it on his person. He knew the man had tried and failed to bribe many of the guards who'd been left over him, Jay insisting that it was the men of the 100 and Sir Richard's own rather than any others who'd been handed the task. His grandmother had been affronted at the suggestion that some of their men would or could be bought for coin, until Marjorie had pointed out that in truth that was what they had done to them in the first place. But once he'd realized he couldn't escape, then Gories had just welcomed his good fortune and good treatment. The man had eaten and drunk far better than all but the noblest of their prisoners. Now, though, he was being led into the Iron Bank's building, and Willis felt nervous about it and about how the bankers may react to him, given the sheer amount of coin the man was in control of. What was to stop him from turning them to his side? It was a question he'd pondered, and one which Sir Richard had provided the answer to. One single word, making everything clear: dragons. Relax. They're just bankers, Wyman said, sensing his nervousness as they entered the bank's domain. "That's the problem, my lord," he said, receiving a large guffaw from the merman in return. Once inside the building, they were taken straight into a large room with a big, imposing desk that had 3 chairs behind it. Willis, Wyman, and Gory Zadorian, the only 3 from their group allowed in the room, all their guards having to wait outside. Willis felt his nerves begin to rise once more, and only relaxed when the tall, thin man walked in carrying a number of books in his hand and took a seat before bidding them take their own. There were a few moments of silence as the man looked at each of them before he then spoke. "And how may the Iron Bank help you today?" the thin man asked. "You know who we are?" Wyman said while Willis gathered his wits about him. Lord Wyman Manderley, newly appointed Master of Trade to His Grace King Jaehaerys Targaryen. Lord Willis Tyrell, newly appointed Master of Coin to the same king, and Gory Sidorian, Paymaster General of the now not-so-golden company, the man said, and though the last part could have been a jape, his voice had not changed at all. "And you are?" Willis asked. "Noho Dimitis. First things first. Gories, if you will," Willis said, finally feeling ready to take charge. "As you are no doubt aware, the Golden Company keeps a large account here with the Iron Bank, and I, as Paymaster General, have control over that account, do I not?" Gories asked. "You are correct. As a result of my agreement with His Grace, I've come here to sign that account over to Lord Willis and the Crown," Gory said. "The entire account?" Noho asked, surprised. "The entire account," Gory said. "Which stands at?" Willis asked. He watched as Noho opened one of the books and began skimming over pages until finally stopping and looking at it intently before picking up a quill and scribbling down some figures on a small piece of paper. In Westerosi, 3,774,604 gold dragons, Noho said, and Willis looked to Wyman, who was smiling at hearing the amount. "And what is needed to bring this account under our control?" he asked. "A signature from Gory Sidorian will suffice," Noho said. "No. Once he signs, he cannot gain access to it from that point?" he asked, looking at both the banker and the red-haired Gories. "He cannot," Noho said. "No. And as per my agreement with His Grace, I'm free to go my way?" Gory said. And Willis nodded. It took a few moments for the papers to be drawn up, and Gory signed them immediately. Willis then, watching as 2 guards came in to remove him from the building, the man's business ties to the Iron Bank now terminated, and his presence no longer welcome. As soon as he was gone, Noho turned to both him and Wyman with a smile now on his face. "And how can the Iron Bank be of service to the Crown?" Noho asked. Willis spoke to the man about the Crown's debt, finding out that it was a little over 500,000, which left them with more than 3 million gold dragons, and put the Crown in the most favorable position it had been in for years. He knew that they owed the Lannisters close to 1 million, and his own family almost as much. But even were they to pay them both off immediately, which they would not, they'd still have over 1 million gold dragons in the accounts. After receiving notes of credit and making himself a signatory on the account, he waited while Wyman was taken into another room. The Lord of White Harbor coming back far too soon for him to have done any business, and Willis finding out as they walked back to their manse that he would need to return on the morrow. Sir Richard was nowhere to be seen when they returned, and Willis could only hope the man's business wouldn't take too long. He was more than eager to return to King's Landing as soon as possible. "You think we'll be departing soon?" he asked Wyman as they sat down to eat later that night. "Before a week's end, I'd imagine my own business should be concluded on tomorrow with any luck, and as for Sir Richard," Wyman said with a shrug, "do you have any idea why he's with us? I mean, other than that vagueness about getting a present for the king?" he asked. "No. The man holds to his secrets as a maiden does her modesty," Wyman said, and Willis chuckled. "The trade, what His Grace suggested. You think it beneficial?" he asked. "Most beneficial. The roots alone will earn us coin, And should we expand as much as I hope, the possibilities are endless, Wyman said, smiling. He was about to ask more about it when he heard the whistle and then the footsteps and looked up to Sir Richard almost strolling into the room. The master of whisperers taking a seat and reaching out to pour himself some of the peach brandy before sipping it and then swallowing it down, only to refill his glass and sit back in his seat. "A good day?" he asked curiously. "Most good. I found the king's present," Richard said with a large smile on his face. "So, after Lord Wyman finishes his business, we can leave?" he asked. "After that, and I find a cage fit to hold a slippery bird," Richard said before laughing. "A very slippery bird indeed." King's Landing. 298 AC. Danny. Seeing her nephew lay so still was disheartening and not something she enjoyed, nor was she able to put on as straight a face as Tyrion or Aemon were. Shiera had not been allowed to visit Jay at all, and though Dany felt for her aunt, she could understand it. Tyrion having told her what had occurred, and while she didn't blame her for it, she had found she was in the minority on that. Shiera, though perhaps blamed herself far more than anyone other than perhaps the Queen did. Her aunt had gone into her shell almost, and barely left her room other than to go to Aemon's. As for her uncle, he'd spent days going over books and had found nothing. Dany having walked in on him more than once looking at a strange book with barely any writing in it. When she'd asked him about it, he told her that it was a book of many names, some calling it signs and portents and others Dany's journal. Both she and Tyrion had been most eager to read it once he'd confirmed that it was indeed the book the dreamer wrote. Both of them disappointed to find that it contained very few actual words other than what seemed to be the secret to hatching dragons' eggs. "This is different than how my own children were born," she said, as she, Tyrion, and Shiera all sat in Aemon's room, her aunt and uncle having asked them both to join them. "How so?" Aemon asked curiously. "I used wildfire," she said to a shocked look from Tyrion. "Why?" her brother asked. "It was what the vision showed me. I fired an arrow and set it on fire and then had to walk into it. I even lost my hair because of it," she said, looking to her aunt to confirm it, and finding she was looking off into the distance. "You were bald?" Tyrion asked, smirking. "A baldy fucker Sandor called me," she said, and her brother started laughing, as did she. When they stopped, she handed the book back to Aemon and Tyrion asked him more about it, Aemon not having any answers as to why there were no more words in it than the ones they could see. "It's so he can't see them," Shiera said. Dany looked to her as her aunt spoke the first words she had since they'd arrived in the room. "Ooh," Tyrion asked. "Blood Raven." "Blood Raven," Aemon said, bidding them both to come closer. "While I've not been able to actually find a way to help Jaehaerys, none of us truly can," Aemon said, and she looked worriedly at Tyrion. "I've instead been reading up on our uncle, though not even the books know him as well as Shiera does." Dany looked to her aunt, who seemed almost resigned to speaking about a man she knew had been her love once. Shiera having only briefly mentioned him to her while they were together in Essos, yet the truth of how she'd felt about him was very clear to her. Brynden and I were fascinated by magic. What it could do, what it could be used for, the limits of knowledge notwithstanding, of course. We read all we could, looked where we could, and given Brynden's gifts, soon found more than perhaps any had before us, or at least any since the Doom. Shiera said. "Gifts?" Tyrion asked. "Brynden, just like Jay was a warg, a powerful one. I believe it's in the blood. Just as we are connected to dragons because of Valyria, Brynden is connected to the old magic because his family were of the first men." Shiera said. "I don't understand," Dany said, looking to her uncle. "We believe that magic knows magic, Dany. It seeks it out, the blood itself searching for it, and looking to join it with its own." The dragons are magical creatures, and while they existed, magic existed, but once they died out, so did it. Aemon said. Magic was gone? Tyrion said, and Aemon nodded. But the blood remained, and it sought to find more magic, called out for it. And while some later tried to bring the dragons back, others took a different route. Aemon said. She looked at her uncle and her aunt, both of them speaking of magic, as if it was a living, breathing thing, and she found herself to be lost once more. My father sought to bring magic back. Oh, that wasn't the only reason he lay with so many women, but it was a reason all the same. His blood compelled him to seek out other magical blood, to restore what was lost when the dragons went away. My mother and Brendan's both had magic in their own blood, and my father was drawn to it. Shiera said, What does this have to do with Jay? Tyrion asked. Magic has a price, a cost, one we're not certain of the true extent of. Shiera believes it led Bloodraven down a dark path, that he sought more and more of it, and the more he gained, the more powerful he became and the more afraid. Aemon said, Afraid? Why would he be afraid if he has so much power? Dany asked, confused, because no matter how much you possess, there is always one who has more, one who is stronger than you, or more skilled, or more handsome, or beautiful, one who has what you have not. And while in life this can manifest itself in more ways than one, in magic it's far more simple. Shiera said, There is something else too. Aemon said, What? Tyrion said, For everything there is an opposite, day and night, good and evil, beautiful and ugly. Aemon said, Light and dark. Shiera said, looking at her. Dany looked at Tyrion, who seemed just as lost as she. The things her aunt and uncle were saying made no sense, and yet in some ways they did too. Bloodraven is dark, she asked, yet she received no confirmation or answer, only Aemon telling her that Bloodraven and Jay were on opposite sides of things, that they were bound to fight against each other, and that only one of them would survive that fight. Whomever it was would then find that that fight was only the beginning of what needed to be done. She left the room far more confused than she had when she had entered it. Dany then making her way to her nephews, and finding both Marjorie and the young girl Joy were on the bed laying by his side. She didn't stay long or disturb them too much, but she reached out her hand and took his own and held it for a few moments as she spoke to him. Dany telling him that she missed him and asking him to come back, that they needed him here for what was to come. The last part she said quietly in her mind and didn't speak aloud before she kissed his cheek and walked from the room. As she slept later on that night, she dreamt of a lone red eye and silver hair, and she woke up shivering as she swore that she heard a man's laugh ring out across the night. King's Landing. 298 AC, Jenna. She had thrown herself into her duties, taking over the running of the Red Keep and the household, so that Marjorie had one less thing to worry about. It was not a selfless act on her part, if the truth was told, Jenna finding she needed to keep busy so she didn't worry too much. It was something that came upon her more when she was idle, the worry and concern, the thoughts that Jay may not wake up or that even worse may occur. Try as she might, she couldn't stop her mind from going to the darkest places, finding that the words of comfort she used with the children or with Marjorie herself were words spoken and yet not words she truly believed. Or to be more precise, words that she believed less and less each day he didn't wake. Jenna had done her best to stay positive, especially around the children, Willem, Tion, and Walder, all showing their worry, as did Tommen each and every day. Yet it was Martin and Joy who were taking it the worst of all, the latter no great surprise. But the former had been, or was to her at least. Kevin and Dorna and even Lancel had expected it as Martin idolized Jay. Jenna listening as her brother told her that her nephew wished to be as much like him as he could be, and it was why he practiced so. But while Martin showed his concern with periods of quietness and distracted thoughts, Joy handled her own exactly how she'd expected. Her niece was willful, angry, uncooperative, and unwilling to listen, and Jenna, despite her frustration with her, couldn't fault her in the very least. She'd not agreed with the children being denied the chance to see him, had felt it would have been better for them all, and Jay perhaps most of all, to allow them into the room. But she'd been overruled. So when she'd found out that Joy had found a way, that her clever little niece had not taken no for an answer, it had made her laugh out loud for the first time in almost a moon. She'd been happy when Marjorie had allowed Joy to come and go as she pleased, and had sworn that she'd seen a change in Jay each time the girl was near. Though perhaps that was her hope and not the truth of things. As the days went by with no change, her mind went elsewhere until finally she could put it off no longer, and so she demanded and was given the chance to go and speak with the Trout. Jamie giving in after she'd made it clear it wasn't a request, and now she walked down the halls and across the yard before heading down to the cells and the woman housed within. Her guards walked with her, and soon enough she was stood outside the woman's cell, Jenna annoyed to see it was not the black ones where she belonged that they'd sent her to. 5 minutes, the jailer said, and she shook her head. I'll take as long as I wish. You have a problem with that. Then go speak to the Lord Hand, she said as he opened the door and let her inside. The woman looked far older than her years, her face more drawn and haggard than Jenna had expected, and it reminded her more of her crazy sister than herself. She looked as if she hadn't slept a true night's sleep in some time, and yet, despite it, she was alert, and she saw how her eyes narrowed and her lips tightened when Catelyn saw her. Jenna noticed how she took in her crimson and gold, and any attempt at the pretense that she'd have made to be anyone else would no doubt fail. Not that she had intended to be anyone but herself here today. I expected more, Jenna said dismissively as she gave Catelyn Tully the once-over. How dare you? Catelyn replied, and Jenna was glad to see that her pride still remained. I dare because, unlike you, I've kept my wits. I wasn't fool enough to pull on the dragon's tail, nor was I hypocrite enough to claim myself to be a woman of faith. I am a woman of faith, Catelyn said loudly. Really? You think the mother will forgive you for trying to kill a child? A bastard, Cat said loudly. No, Trout, I'm afraid you are very much mistaken. Even your true and pious High Septon accepts the truth of his birth. Not that it matters. A child is a child, and all are innocent in the eyes of the mother. Or did your Septa not teach you that? He posed a risk to my house, Cat said. Did he indeed? The very house that's in the best position it's been in since it wore a crown itself? Or perhaps you mean the house of fish that you come from, and if so, then it was you and the other little trouts that posed the true threat to that one. He wanted to usurp my son, Cat said, looking at her. You truly are a fool. It's no wonder that Brandon Stark had no wish to marry you, or that Eddard couldn't wait to set you aside, she said with a smile. You lie. Brandon loved me. And yet he married another, had a child with another, who usurped who, Lady Fish? Jenna said. Aye, the boy. It was all the boy. The boy you tried to kill. The brother you tried to take away from your children. Let me tell you about that boy, Trout. That boy is worth all your children. 100 of them. 1,000 of them. That boy has naught but kindness and compassion in him. He cares for others, far more than he does himself, and puts them above his own feelings each and every time. Not for favor or as part of some plan as you would claim it so, but because it's who he is. Unlike you, Trout, that boy has a heart that's full of love, not hate, not petty jealousy, and fears that have no grounding in truth. She moved closer to her, her voice now softer as she did so. "I should have you dragged from here, paraded through the streets, and let the people know what you tried to do to their king. You'd see it then." Catelyn Tully. Or is it Baelish? She snorted. "You'd see what they think of that boy you hate so. And trust me, the sentence they'd impose on you would be one you well deserved. I should do so, but I won't, because your fate is not mine to decide. No, it's that boy who'll judge you and find you guilty. Think on that when you sleep tonight, or if you sleep tonight." Jenna turned to walk away and then stopped, turning back and seeing the look of abject fear that was now on Catelyn's face. Had you truly been a pious woman, a woman of faith, a woman with even an ounce of motherly love inside of you, was that truly who you were? Then you'd have seen what we all saw when we looked at Jon. You'd have seen a boy that any of us would have been proud to call our own. You could have had it all. His love, his adoration, and his support. Had you had but 1 ounce of love inside of you, 1 ounce of kindness that you'd have been willing to show him, he'd have fought the entire world to make you happy. That's who that boy is, and that's who you tried to take away from us, and that's who I damn you for. The worst of the 7 hells awaits you, Trout, and no one has ever deserved it more." She walked out from the cell, and as the doors closed, she leaned up against the wall and tried to compose herself. Never before had she felt anger the likes of which had just came over her. Jenna looking down to see where her fingers had dug into the palms of her hand, and where in 1 or 2 places they'd broken the skin. As she took a deep breath, she closed her eyes and then opened them before she began to move, and soon enough she found herself outside the king's chambers. "How is he?" she asked as she walked in, Marjorie sitting by the bed, and Joy and Balerion leaning against Ghost on top of it. Beyond the wall, 298 AC, Bloodraven. He scrambled and tried to close back up the walls, fixing them 1 brick at a time, and finding almost as soon as he did so, another came crashing down. The words his kinsman had spoken had sent a shiver down his spine, and he felt a fear that he'd not felt in years. Brynden was not used to being the one who was afraid. Even seeing his enemy to the north had never made him feel this way, and as he tried desperately to keep his kinsman contained, he thought back to when he'd seen the truth of what was to come. Their house would fall. The vision had been clear enough in that, and so he'd done all he could to see that it would not come about. He'd killed his brother, though, not truly with his own hands, his nephew's, though he couldn't be certain it was any arrow he'd fired that had seen them fall. True enough, he'd tried to end Aegor, but he'd been left with no choice, had he not? It had cost him an eye, and yet even that he'd seen was to come, if not quite how it was to occur. He had done it all for them, and they'd cast him aside. He'd given them his blood, his eye, his love, and they'd sent him to rot away at the end of the world. Brynden finding his bitterness rising like a fire, which kept him warm from the cold. He'd wondered why he'd not seen this end, why he'd not known this was to come, and he knew then his magic was not strong enough for him to truly see. It was then the voices and the dreams came, the call from a place even further north than here, and Brynden began to make plans that he knew may never come to pass. How many years passed he could not tell, but he felt his power grow. The deal he'd made with the old god's servant was one he never intended to keep, and one which would serve him and not them. Time was like a river to him, and he'd learned how it truly ran. And once you knew where to go, how to travel along the waters, nothing stood in your way. Forward, backward, or simply standing still, he'd done it all. And then he'd seen the thing in the cold, the thing that sought his end, but would never end him. And finally he saw the one who would. It was useless. Beyond hope, the walls were tumbling down far quicker than he could rebuild them. The prison hadn't been enough, and his kinsman was breaking free and would soon be coming for him. A destiny that he'd tried so very hard to avoid was close to being inevitable, unless he acted, and acted soon. "Belief," he called out, "at Corn." His words drifted in the wind, and none answered, and so he closed his eyes to see and saw them all sitting around a small fire that burned in the cave. Brendan opened his eyes and called out to them once more, and still, the children didn't come. He needed the paste, and he needed it now, and so he reached out and called the raven to him. The sound of its wings as it flew through the cave seeming far louder than they should. It took him some time to eat enough, the raven feeding him as if he was its chick, and Brendan feeling his strength begin to grow as he closed his eyes and reached out to any who'd listen. He felt his kin, old and young, known and unknown to him, Shiera standing out like a beacon but close to him, Aemon there but not, and Daenerys just outside his reach. The dwarf forced him away, not allowing him even close, and he knew the one he wished for most was lost to him forever now. Not even his prison would hold him back. So Brendan took to the air once more, his ravens flying and yet not. North, south, east, and west, a small girl, an older woman, a young man, all mere flickering lights, and soon enough he was back in familiar places. 1,000 eyes and one, the voice whispered as it slept, the patch no longer on his eye, and the hollow space seeming as familiar as his own. Brendan began to send the dreams to break down the walls of the mind, and then he beckoned him to come his way. It would not be the same. The man's magic was weak and not true, but better to be out and be gone than to await the fate that headed his way. Blow the horn, and bring me to you," he said softly as he showed the pirate dreams that would never come to pass. King's Landing. 298 AC. Marjorie. She changed his clothing alone, Joy having left early that morning, and Marjorie already missing her company. As worried as she was about Jay, Joy had a way of almost ignoring it, or more, of making her feel as if she could. Marjorie, listening on as she told Jay story after story, as she spoke of the Yenchers to come, and of Apples, Winter, Ghost, and Rainix too. When she'd first found the girl in their bed, she thought she'd seen something in her husband's expression, and she swore that she heard him make sounds that he made with no one else. At times when she touched his cheek or leaned against his chest, she had felt it too, as if he was awake and was watching her. She'd been certain it was only a matter of time, that any day now he'd wake, and so had been more than happy to have Joy come back and spend time with him and with her. Sure that together they'd bring him back home, only to find the days had gone by without him waking. It was now 4 that had passed since that first night, and each one of them had only made her lose that faith a little more. Joy will be back later, Jay. I'm sure she'll have another story for us to enjoy. I like that one best of all. Was that me you were telling her about? It was, wasn't it, gods? Was that how you saw me? She spoke as if he was answering her questions, and she knew it was something that she'd picked up from Joy. Marjorie finishing dressing him and readying to wash and feed him before people came by to spend some time with them both. It was hard, waking up beside him and then dressing and cleaning him and then herself, bathing only when someone she trusted was in the room, and eating only when she had company that forced her to. Her sleep was fitful. Little sounds would wake her up, and she'd found herself calling out his name more than once. Laura's and the rest of the Kingsguard had quickly gotten used to the difference between her tones, knowing when she was worried and when it was nothing for them to be bothered about. Some days were almost like a daze to her, like a dream she couldn't quite remember, and she wondered how she seemed on those days to any who saw her. Did they think she was losing her mind? Was she? It was hard to tell, and the ideas she was having would suggest that she may very well be. Am I mad, Jay? What I intend to do, is it mad? Or is it what you truly need? She asked him, and just as she thought it would be the same and that she'd received no sign or no reply, she swore she saw his hand move. Hurrying to the bed, she grabbed his hand and brought it to her face, and then she closed her eyes. "It is what I must do, isn't it?" she said hopefully, and she felt her cheek being touched, startling her so much that she cried out loudly and dropped his hand to the bed. Sir Arthur and Sir Barristan both came rushing inside, Marjorie now sitting on the bed reaching desperately for her husband's hand, a smile on her face as she turned to look at the two knights. When she told them what she wished to do, both of them made ready to talk her out of it, Marjorie quickly rising to her feet and looking intently at them both. "I am your queen, and this is my command. See that it's made ready," she said firmly, and leaving no room for question. It took them some time, and she waited by the side of the bed. She'd hurriedly dressed Jay in clothes that he'd not worn in weeks. She struggled to get his boots on, having to almost force them over his feet, and she knew that his coat was barely buttoned, but in her excited state she cared not. When the Kingsguard returned, it was all of them, and not just two, and soon enough she was being helped to the carriage, the ride itself not taking long, and Rhaenys was already waiting for them when they got there. Marjorie looked on as they carried Jay over to the dragon, as they lay him down beside his sister, as she could see the doubt and worry in their faces. What did they think was going to happen, she wondered. Did they think Rhaenys would harm him? That she could? If so, then just looking at the dragon would show that could never be. How large Rhaenys was she'd not been able to truly ascertain. She was as large, if not larger, than a pinnacle ship, and her head alone was as big as the carriage they'd arrived in. Yet she and they watched the dragon place it on Jay's chest, and it was done with such gentleness that she wondered if the weight was even felt. "Your Grace, are you sure about this?"
Sir Barristan asked, and Marjorie nodded as they looked and waited.
Two. Marjorie then feeling her legs moving without her consent when she saw his hand rise up to touch the dragon's face. Go, eh? J. Harry's Targaryen. The woman led him down through cobbled streets, and soon he was walking on a dark paved road, the night moonless, and the darkness only lightened by the white of the wolf's fur. He hurried after what he assumed to be both the wolf and the woman, finding them to always stay the same distance away from him, no matter if he ran or walked. After some time he felt the rain begin to fall, and then the darkness began to lighten, Jay watching as the sun rose in front of him and began to reflect off the buildings he now found himself surrounded by. High into the clouds they rose, their stone polished so smoothly that they looked to be carved out of one piece rather than the many stones most buildings were made from. Jay looked around and found that he now couldn't see either the woman or the white wolf. Instead, there were many other people walking through the streets of what he now knew could only be Valyria. He heard, rather than saw, the dragons, their roars, and their happy trills letting him know they flew somewhere high above him. When he felt his hand be taken, he almost shouted out, "Jay!" looking down to see the silver-haired girl pulling his hand as she began to walk ahead of him. "Who are you?" He asked, to no reply other than a now more urgent pull on his hand. Knowing there was little else he could do and not wishing to just stand around and hope the answers came to him, he followed after the little girl, who smiled at him when he did so. Jay took the chance to look at her more clearly. Her silver hair and deep purple eyes marked her clearly as a Valyrian, and yet there was something familiar about her too, something he couldn't quite place. She led him down the smooth, paved roads, and Jay looked around to see the sheer number of people who were out and about, estimating the city to be even fuller than King's Landing was. How long he walked with the girl he couldn't tell. It seemed like they'd covered a lot of ground, and yet he didn't feel as if he'd been walking very long at all. The large building she stopped in front of was bigger than the entire Red Keep, and yet it wasn't even close to being the largest one around. Jay, hearing the girl giggle as she let go of his hand and ran up the steps that led to a large gate. "Wait, come back," he shouted after her, but she didn't turn or stop. And then he swore she just seemed to disappear through the still unopened gates. Taking the steps two at a time, he soon found himself standing in front of the gates and almost fell to the ground when he saw the symbol carved into them. The three-headed dragon was red on a black base, and he knew then that this had been his family's home. Reaching out to touch it, he found himself almost falling, and when he stopped himself from doing so and looked around, he found he was now on the other side of the gates. As he walked through a large garden, and was even more beautifully laid out than the ones in Highgarden. Jay began to hear voices and moved towards them. He saw a tall, silver-haired man speaking to two women who could only be related to him. Both women dressed very differently. One wore ringmail and bore a sword on her hip. The other wore the most beautiful dress he'd ever seen and was laughing at something the man said. Jay moved towards them only for them to seem to fade away the closer he got, and so he continued on and moved further through the gardens. Soon enough he heard even more voices and found they came from a small grove, and so he moved towards it. Upon entering it, he saw an old man with braided silver hair sitting and writing in a book, while beside him a small, slim old woman stood, both of them looking over what the man had written. Then, just as with the others, they faded away from him as soon as he moved towards them. On and on he walked through the gardens, and then he saw the girl once more. This time she was laughing as a slightly plump man chased after her and called out her name. "Rhaenyra, Rhaenyra, I'm going to catch you, my little delight." The man called out to the girl's increasing laughter. The more people he saw, the more he began to recognize them. Daeron, the young dragon, Aegon the Unlikely, his great-grandfather and namesake, Jaehaerys II. Each part of the garden almost seeming to be yet another place where one of his ancestors took up space, and each time he moved towards any of them, he found them fading from view. By the time he reached the garden closest to the palace itself, he was about to give up any hope that they were anything more than apparitions or phantoms of his mind. Jay knew he would have if he'd not seen the white wolf and the dark-haired woman once again. "Jay, this way." She called out, and whether it was the sound of her voice which allowed him to truly place her, or the fact that the sun seemed to dim ever so slightly, Jay found himself running after his mother as she walked into a section of the garden that was surrounded by high hedges. He stopped as soon as he ran past them and into the clearing, looking to see them all sitting down under what was the largest weirwood tree he'd ever seen. His father, mother, and grandmother were speaking, while beside them, Elias spoke to two silver-haired men and a small and beautiful dark-haired girl. Rhaenys looked his way and smiled before she turned to Egg beside her and pointed in his direction, while Viserys moved to speak to his mother. Jay moved quickly towards them and almost screamed out as with each step he took the place he was in began to change. The sun stopped shining as brightly. The grass beneath his feet began to turn to stone, and the white bark of the weirwood began to turn dark. He called out to his mother, his father, to his grandmother and his uncle, to Elia, Egg, and finally to Rhaenys, his words echoing around a much different place. Let me stay," he shouted out, his voice pained as he fell to his knees and onto the hard rock beneath his feet. How long he stayed kneeling there and how many tears he shed he didn't know, but was it not for the sound of a woman's voice singing, he'd not have had the strength to rise to his feet. Jay wiped his eyes and followed the sound of the woman's voice, and soon found himself to be walking through the keep at Dragonstone. Down corridor after corridor he walked, each one leading him closer until he came to a room with an open door and saw a silver-haired girl singing a song as she wrote into a book. "You came," she said happily when she saw him. "I knew you would." "Who are you?" he asked. "You know who I am. And that's not the question you need to ask, Jaehaerys. The question is, who are you?" The girl asked, looking at him. I'm lost," he said softly. "I know, but you have to lose yourself before you can be found, do you not?" "Where am I?" he asked, moving into the room. "You're here, silly," she said with a melodic giggle. "But I'm not supposed to be here, am I?" "You were always supposed to be here. It's only from here you can go there," she said, pointing to the window. He followed her hand and saw the Red Keep and then the Dragon Pit, Rhaenys, Marjorie, Sir Arthur, and Sir Barristan all around. Something on the ground, and then as he looked beyond them, he swore he saw the gates of the palace in Valyria too. "I want to go home," he said, looking to her. "But where is your home, Jaehaerys? Is it where you live or where you're from?" "Answer," she asked. "I don't know," he said. As good an answer as any. One day you will. Until that day comes, you need to read this. You'll find the answers you seek inside," she said, handing him her journal before stepping up from her seat and walking to another door in the room and opening it, Jay seeing a bright light shining through it. "Don't go," he said, looking to her. "We'll meet again, Jaehaerys. For now, read the song. It'll explain some of what you need to know," she said. "What song?" he asked. "Open the book," she said, and he looked down to see the writing on the page. "Who are you?" he asked as she smiled at him before she walked through the door. He sat down on the seat that she'd just left and looked down at the page, the words of the song written clearly. One dream, one soul, one prize, one goal, one golden glance of what should be. It's a kind of magic, one shaft of light that shows the way. No mortal man can win this day. It's a kind of magic. The bell that rings inside your mind is challenging the doors of time. It's a kind of magic. The waiting seems eternity. There can be only one. This rage that lasts 1,000 years will soon be gone. This flame that burns inside of me. I'm hearing secret harmonies. It's a kind of magic. The bell that rings inside your mind is challenging the doors of time. This rage that lasts 1,000 years will soon be gone. This is a kind of magic. There can be only one. The light was blinding as he closed the book over. Jay looked at it as it shined through the door that the girl had left open. As he rose to his feet, he heard the sound of a bell ring out, and he walked into the light. She was in his arms as soon as he did so, her lips on his cheek as she kissed him repeatedly, and Jay looked up into her brown eyes and saw the tears as they fell down her face. His fingers brushed them away as his wife's smile showed that it wasn't sadness that made them fall. "Marjorie," he said softly as she kissed his lips.